On the television show The Big Bang Theory, one of the lead characters named Sheldon has a favorite seat in his apartment that he refers to as his spot. As a running gag in the series, whenever visitors accidentally sit in his spot, he forces them to move elsewhere. As he settles into his spot, he informs the misguided visitor that he chose his spot due to its proximity to the radiator, saying it's close enough to remain warm, but not so close to cause perspiration. And it faces the television at an angle that is neither direct, thus discouraging conversation, nor so far wide to create a parallax distortion. Sheldon isn't the first television character to have a favorite seat. There's also Martin Crane from Frasier, who brought that ugly chair into the living room of his snobbish son's upscale apartment. And then there's the 70s show, All in the Family, with Archie Bunker and his favorite worn wing chair. According to the author of Now I Sit Me Down, Witold Rybczynski, an architect and chair historian, he says the need for these characters to have their favorite seats reflects our historical culture, from the ancient Egyptians to modern-day plastic chairs. He states we have our favorite chairs or spots where we like to type, watch sports programs, or read. Rybczynski admits he also has a favorite chair when he's typing, and he describes his favorite chair as an old wooden banker's chair that swivels, tilts, and rolls, and he's owned for more than 30 years. However, he confesses, even though it starts out as a comfortable chair with its scoop seat, curved arms, and a contoured back, after a while, when he sits for too long, he begins to fidget, shift his weight, and move his cramped muscles. He concludes that while we are good at walking and running, and we're happy when we're lying down, it's in the in-between position that's the problem. A chair represents a struggle to resolve the conflict between gravity and the human anatomy. He states, sitting is always a challenge. And though he states this, then we look at the Gospels of Matthew, Luke, and John, and apparently the disciples have no problem sitting. For example, in John's Gospel, when Jesus appeared to the disciples after the crucifixion, he found them doing what in a darkened room? Sitting. In Luke's Gospel, after the crucifixion, Jesus found them in a boat, huddled together, sitting. And in Matthew's Gospel, when the women discovered Jesus was alive, they rushed back to the place where the disciples were gathered, and if you can guess it, you've got it right, they were sitting. But Jesus doesn't want them to remain seated, especially in Matthew. He informed them that they have work to do, work that can't be done sitting down. The women informed the disciples they're to travel to Galilee to meet Jesus on a mountaintop. And when they arrive, they discover Jesus had returned from death and was alive. The disciples immediately fell at his feet and worshipped him. But there's an interesting comment Matthew includes. He says, some doubted. I suppose if we'd been in their sandals, we may have doubted as well. It's unnatural for someone to die on a cross and return to life. It just doesn't happen. Just as when Jesus walked on water and asked Peter to come out and join him. It's unnatural. Humans don't just walk on water. But then, of course, we know it does. And Matthew informs us that Jesus indeed walked on water and indeed rose from the grave. But it's interesting, Matthew includes that Peter was filled with doubt, which is the only other time Matthew used the word doubt. 2 places. When Peter's walking on water, and here in this moment when Jesus is standing on a mountain in front of him. In the instance of experienced doubt on the mountaintop, Matthew is ambiguous about who had the doubt, though. Matthew's phrase, and excuse me, I haven't used Greek for a while, but his phrase, hoi de edestason, could have meant, as it's translated in this morning's text, that while all worshipped, some doubted. But the word hoi has been translated as both some and all. Therefore, he could have also meant all the disciples worshipped while they doubted. And then, of course, there's this little fun word, doubt, which has also been translated as hesitation, edestation. In addition, when Matthew uses this phrase, he may have been referring to the whole mountaintop experience and not just the fact that Jesus was standing in front of them. In that light, then, it's likely the disciples weren't doubtful that Jesus stood in front of them. Rather, they were hesitant because Jesus gave them difficult instructions. Essentially, Jesus told them to stop sitting, leave their comfortable lazy boys and recliners, and go out to turn the world upside down by proclaiming His love for the world as they made disciples of the nations. This was a scary thing for the disciples because Jesus was calling them to get up and go be prophets. And that was terrifying for the disciples because they were fully aware of the dangers prophets faced, like Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Amos. Jeremiah told the Hebrews in Judah to return to God, and he was thrown in a cistern. Isaiah preached throughout Israel for the people to love one another and to love God, and rumor says he was sawn in half. And poor Amos, he preached in his hometown that God wanted justice and righteousness to flow like an ever-flowing stream. And unfortunately, no one ever knew what happened to him. Poor Amos. All of these prophets preached a message similar to Jesus. And like Jesus, the world refused to embrace this message and reacted to love with extreme violence. In regard to the disciples, they didn't even need their imagination to visualize the violence humanity is capable of because they saw it firsthand. And even right then, in that moment, Jesus stood in front of them with visible scars, a result of the message of peace and love He delivered. And His scars were a terrifying reminder of what happens to those who speak on God's behalf. No wonder they hesitated. They doubted they could fulfill Jesus' instructions. Perhaps this is why they returned to Jerusalem and they simply sat. However, just as the body is not meant to sit for long, so our spiritual lives aren't designed to sit for long either. As the disciples sat, hesitant to move, suddenly the Holy Spirit rushed into the room with the sound of a violent wind. A flame descended and split into 11 tongues of brightly burning flames and rested on each of them. They were filled with the Holy Spirit, and they stood, proclaiming and prophesying and telling people about Jesus Christ, and thus launching the official birth of the Christian church. Encouraged by the Spirit to move and shake and proclaim God's wonders, Paul left his recliner and stood before strangers and neighbors and proclaimed the good news of God. He no longer feared their judgmental glances or their gossiping whispers. He was no longer hesitant nor feared for his life as he boldly called out to the lonely and outcast, to the drug dealer and the bully. He connected with those who longed for meaning in their lives, and he reached out to those who had been spiritually sitting for too long. Through his genuine care for others, he allowed people to have access to Jesus, asking, "What do you like about your life? And what would make it better?" Afterward, Peter and the disciples went a step further. They listened to the prayerful needs of those who had been sitting far too long, and they responded to the needs of their community with care and love, and they delivered hope. The community embraced Peter's message, and they believed the words of Jesus as they too were filled with the Holy Spirit. They sprung from their seats to accomplish the difficult tasks Jesus gave. Things like loving our enemies and our neighbors as we love ourselves. Working for peace and justice so that righteousness flows like rivers. Forgiving those who trespass against us. And doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. These are hard things that demand a lot of hard work. But through the restless power of the Holy Spirit, the disciples and those who followed after them did not let these difficult things get in the way of their mission as they sprung out of their recliners and got to work. The spirit of Pentecost event burnt in their souls with a prophetic force, just as it burns in our lives and our church today. The blazing Spirit burns beneath our seats, causing us to spring up and do the difficult work Jesus calls us to do, so we can inspire hope in our broken and sinful world. Whether it's supporting an art class of youth who come and meet on Saturdays, whether it's gathering together in community for dinner and lunch on Wednesdays, the power of the Holy Spirit brings us together and inspires us to burn deep with love for others. As we move away from the comfort of our safety spots to spring up and help people discover that Jesus Christ is important and relevant to their lives. As we embrace the energy and presence of the Holy Spirit, just as it launched the birth of the church over 2,000 years ago, it still encourages us to remain faithful to God as we obey Jesus' commands. This is the fire and the energy that burns on this Pentecost Sunday, with the red flames that surround us, that enter our lives and inspire us to serve others and to discern what is it we can provide for our neighbors and to do the tough thing, which is to love one another just as Jesus loved us.